Our reading before our sermon is a poem by Charles Bukowski. This is called So You Want to Be a Writer. If it doesn't come bursting out of you in spite of everything, don't do it. Unless it comes unasked out of your heart and your mind and your mouth and your gut, don't do it. If you have to sit for hours staring at your computer screen or hunched over your typewriter searching for words, don't do it. If you're doing it for money or fame, don't do it. If you're doing it because you want women in your bed, don't do it. If you have time to sit there and rewrite it again and again, don't do it. If it's hard work just thinking about doing it, don't do it. If you're trying to write like somebody else, forget about it. If you have to wait for it to roar out of you, then wait patiently. And if it never does roar out of you, do something else. If you first have to read it to your wife or your girlfriend or your boyfriend or your parents or to anybody at all, then you're not ready. Don't be like so many writers. Don't be like so many thousands of people who call themselves writers. Don't be dull and boring and pretentious, and don't be consumed with self-love. The libraries of the world have yawned themselves to sleep over that kind. Don't add to it. Don't do it. Unless it comes out of your soul like a rocket. Unless being still would drive you to madness or suicide or murder. Unless the sun inside you is burning your gut. When it is truly time, and if you have been chosen, it will do it by itself, and it will keep on doing it until you die, or it dies in you. There is no other way, and there never was. Our speaker this morning is my friend and fellow writer, Jan Perry, speaking on art and spirituality and writing as doorways to the spiritual life.
I'm not sure if that message is don't do it. Should I sit down? No, I won't sit down. I will tell you the bad omen I had this morning. My daughter and her family and I live together, and my 4-year-old grandson slept in my area last night because it was a treat. So I was, one last time, I'm going to read through this, and I'm 2/3 the way through, and he's got his blankie, and he's curled up on the sofa looking at me. So my hope is that none of you pull out your blankies. I want to thank you for having me here today. I was honored to be asked by Gay to participate in this month of the arts and spirituality. What a great topic. I've found stepping into the world of arts from the world of science to be invigorating and other things. Taking this opportunity, the opportunity of this talk to think about it has been very useful to me. It's been a challenge for this retired physical therapy teacher. Let's see where it goes. A couple of months ago, I was listening to a Mel Madrona book, he was reading it, on Native American healing. Among other things, he said, "You start by telling your story." Somehow that seems pertinent for today's topic. And I came across several other quotes that I'd like to share. The idea is to write so that people hear it, and it slides through the brain and goes straight to the heart. That's Maya Angelou. The next quote is Mel Madrona again. The goal of storytelling, he says, is putting them to sleep so that they dream like they're asleep, but they're awake. And I've just discovered Ursula Le Guin. I love her essays and talks. This is a quote of hers. It's a little longer. The imagination is an essential tool of the mind, a fundamental way of thinking, an indispensable means of becoming and remaining human. We have to learn to use it like any other tool. When children are taught to hear and learn the central literature of their people, to read and understand it, their imagination is getting a very large part of the exercise it needs. Nothing else does quite as much for most people, not even the other arts. We are a wordy species. Words are the wings both intellect and imagination fly on. Music, dance, visual arts, crafts of all kinds are all central to human development and well-being. And no art or skill is ever useless learning. but to train the mind to take off from the immediate reality and return to it with new understanding and new strength, nothing quite equals poem or story. That's from an essay called The Operating Instructions in the book Words Are My Matter. All those quotes spoke to me, and here's how I hope they'll play out today. The only story I can tell is... How about now? Ah! And I'm having to hold this up because I'm short. I was stuck for however many years it is you have a driver's license when I stepped up to have my picture taken, and the frame was up here. And they're lowering it, and I have this idiot grin on my face. And anyway. So the only story you're going to hear today is mine. Somehow, writing is supposed to bypass the brain. That's an interesting thought for a retired science-based teacher. I'd like to explore what that means. Imagination is central to being human, and reading and writing develop it. Where does imagination come from, and what do we use it for? And what's the writer's responsibility here? Finally, how do art, spirituality, and writing interact with each other? I have to move you back just a little. Still good? But I've lost my place. There we go. As I said the last time I was here, I'm a writer, but I'm not a writer. My dive into creative writing started after my husband died, so 3 years ago, roughly. I have several short stories on my computer. I have a few poems on my computer. I have a novel that I self-published, so it's out there. And I have a couple of short stories roaming around the internet on some e-journals. I think that makes me a baby writer, and it means you're going to hear my story of becoming a writer, or the thought process. And this is a lofty topic for a newbie writer, and I must say I am intimidated, but that's how we learn. What does it mean to bypass the brain of the reader? I wonder, too, if it might mean to bypass the brain of the writer. I'm what's considered a pantser as opposed to a planner in the writing world. That means, as you probably guessed, I write by the seat of my pants. I write to see how the story ends. Some writers plan every detail, or at least the major points of their story. I start with the germ of an idea, or a word, or an object, and I start to write. That's the first place that spirituality comes into play today. I have faith that something is in there that will come out as a story. Sometimes I write for fun to see what happens. Other times I write to figure out where I am in my life story, or to meet a writing challenge for a writer's group that Chris and I belong to. For all of those, I sit at my laptop, identify the topic or the challenge, a new story, grief, waiting for a grandchild to be born, wondering what my next step is, and I start writing. Often these pieces take turns and twists I never expected. Sometimes those turns are messages for me or new ways of seeing. Sometimes I don't know what they mean and spend days pondering that. That's another way spirituality enters the picture. I wonder if spirituality might be related to bypassing the brain. A couple of months ago, I had an inspiration to write something for a writers group I belong to. We were given a challenge to write about size and shadows. Well, inspiration is a loaded word. It means different things to different people. By inspiration, I thought, size and shadows, I could write 500 words about that. I did not have an, oh my gee, size and shadows? I see it now. I don't have those. Very unscientific. As I started to write, as I started to think about what to write about, a piece of a poem just sort of arrived. Here it is. It isn't complete. I think it's an example of something that bypassed my brain and had a message for me, and I'm still figuring it out. It was dark. The wind came. She stopped. She let out a long sigh. She contemplated the nothing in front of her. The sigh became a mist, frosty and white. She watched with disinterest. She sighed again. A pewter gray mist joined the frost. The sighs intertwined. A dragon, gray body, white wings, bored to tears. A tear hit the dragon, a shower of diamonds, each scale dusted with diamonds. A spark of interest in her eye, the start of a smile, a splash of red. The dragon's eyes caressed it, flared crimson. His fire raged. He hissed at her, covered her with dragon fire. He turned and flew to the west. She watched his shadow until it became nothing. She sighed again. Black ooze and brown muck drained from her toes. She stood and turned. She was regal, smiling. She walked to the north. Each footfall left a ruby. As I pondered that over the next few days, since I had no idea what it meant, I realized this was what may have been one of the first times I had a glimmer that the chaos and uncertainty since my husband's death almost 4 years ago might be coming to an end. That would be nice. Grief flying off until it becomes nothing, black ooze and muck, grief and sadness perhaps, turning into rubies. The writing created the images. I seemed to be uninvolved. Yes, I know, I created them because I wrote them, but I did not know them and then write them. I wrote them and then figured out what the meaning was for that moment. That seems to be the difference, knowing what the writing means before or after it's written. At least that makes sense to me. It might be different next month or for someone else. For me, this is part of the spirituality of writing. The flow of ideas has to come from somewhere, and I don't think these came from my reasoning brain. I think they came from my soul, which can talk through the brain if I get out of its way. It's Maya Angelou's quote in reverse. She said, "The idea is to write it so that people hear it and it slides through the brain and goes straight to the heart." Sometimes I think the writing slides out of the writer's heart into the fingers, bypassing the brain and not being much affected by it. Mel Madrona has a different use of stories. He uses them to help people heal. He doesn't want people to think about them. He wants to touch the part of the person that is beyond thinking. He wants to connect with the soul. He does it with a rich background that combines decades of study of Native American healing and Native American stories and psychiatry. His spirituality is what tells him what story to tell and how to tell it to touch a person's soul, so the person's soul will recognize what it needs to do to heal. While healing may not be the goal, I think that is what writers do. Through words that grow pictures and words that sing, the writer wants to transport the reader to another realm, a realm where anything might happen and, more importantly, seem believable to the reader. This puts a huge responsibility on writers. What worlds do they want to create? What muscles of the reader do they want to exercise? How do they want the reader to feel after the story is read? I think this is the sliding through the brain idea Maya Angelou talks about. What does it mean to slide through the brain? For the writer, I think the brain is there for the mechanics, punctuation, spelling, sentence structure. But the heart or the soul is sometimes in the driver's seat. I've heard a writer talk about channeling someone and just writing down what they hear. I can't say that I've experienced that, and I don't think it would be much fun. I've always hated taking notes. But I have experienced sitting down and wondering what's going to happen next to a character. And ideas and then words just start to flow. That was not my experience writing my dissertation. A dissertation is all head work. Research, reading, integrating, trying to make it all make sense, trying to please a group of people. My soul wasn't engaged. The words did not just flow then. Blood maybe, not words. Words flowing for me, seems to happen when I'm not planning and researching. For instance, in my book, I have several trees that talk to people. Good science, right? For some reason, one tree always counts when he's talking. Why? I have no idea. It just happened. How can I say it just happened when I wrote it? I don't know. That's the magic part of writing, the part that slides by the brain. For some writers, it might be planned, but for some of us, it isn't. For me, a few times I've written something and I finish it with a sense of, that's pretty neat, I wonder where that came from. That was how the ending of my book happened. I sat down, I think it was at Bona Cafe, thinking I had 2 or 3 more chapters, a lot of words left to write, to wrap up the book, and I started writing, and the book finished itself in just a few pages. I thought, that can't be right. That's too simple. Let me look at it again, and I'll rewrite. I reread, I liked it, and I left it alone. That's the sliding by the brain. And if the brain isn't doing it, what is? For me, the answer is the soul or the heart. What does it mean, however, for words to slide by the reader's brain and into the heart? The Velveteen Rabbit, Harry Potter, and The Hobbit all have the reader happily believing in magic and whimsical creatures and alternate worlds. The writer sends a message that's understood beyond words. The reader sometimes doesn't realize a message has even been received. The words snuck through the thought process and directly attached to the soul. The reader is surprised by the feelings evoked. The reader did not stop to think, wow, that was some great use of alliteration. The book just burbled and bounced and bubbled, and the reader saw it, heard it, and enjoyed it. Or we just want to touch the Velveteen Rabbit in the hopes that some of that love might rub off on us. We don't think about the words. We don't look at the sentences. We close the book and are ready to pack our bags and move to that place to experience whatever we just read. The brain is bypassed, the soul is engaged, magic is created. Ah, to write like that. Magic and imagination are linked. As I read at the beginning, Le Guin talks about imagination. Where does imagination come from? Spirituality is raising its head again. If the heart or soul is driving the process, what's engaged in the reader? What's the source of this magical process? Does source have a capital S? If it is of the divine, are there rules for how to engage it? What's a writer's responsibility in a spiritual sense? That is a deep question that I'm not qualified to answer, but it is a question I think about a lot, actually. It leads to another deep question. What should our entertainment be? This is a bit of a soapbox for me. You can relax, I won't step up on it right now. But I do find myself wondering about the impact of our choices in television, movies, books, video games. How do they engage the imagination? Does our entertainment lift us up or bring a smile to our face or drag us down or harden us? Do we, producer or consumer, have a moral responsibility in choosing? As a Baha'i, I believe that God created us to acquire virtues that lead to the betterment of mankind. That is simplistic, but it's my 5-second version. I also believe that my choices in entertainment affect my acquisition of virtues. As a writer, that also affects me. Maybe one of my jobs as a writer is to support Le Guin's view of the imagination. Maybe helping people exercise their imagination in uplifting ways is one of my roles. That's a real challenge. I've read things that were preachy, and I often don't enjoy them. I've read things that involved goodness and light and magnificent ideas, and they were boring and saccharine. My personal quest as a writer has been to write stories that are uplifting, engaging, and fun. Mostly engaging and fun. I love a story that I don't want to put down, and that's what I want to write. And I don't want to write profanity, cruelty, violence, or sex. That seriously limits what people want to read. It seems that one of the more significant choices a writer must make is, in a broad sense, what he or she wants to elicit from the reader. The options are multitudinous. I think the writer's sense of spirituality determines the answer to the question. And the answer is tremendously personal. I don't think anyone has the right answer. Commercial success can have a huge impact on the answer. Does one write what is in their heart, the best thing to write, or what will sell? That is a question I have not had to wrestle with. My writing is for fun, not making a living. Retirement is good. Thinking about the intersection of art, writing, and spirituality is daunting. Thinking of myself creating art seems grandiose, but that's what putting words together to create a story is, I guess. And when I think about spiritual writing, the first place I go is Bible stories or biographies of saints. I was quite enamored of the biography of Joan of Arc as a preteen. At this point in my life, for the most part, I don't want any of those. Several years ago, I found a series of books by Deborah Geary about modern-day witches. The concept was like any witches I knew about, and I was intrigued. I wanted to be one of them. I was drawn, and I was a grown adult. I was drawn into the tight sense of community and the shared responsibility. The people were wonderful, and I loved the witches and the community and the love they shared. I admit, another reason I wanted to be a witch was because, according to this author, magic power required a lot of fuel, and their fuel of choice was cookies. Nutella cookies, to be specific. One of the readers even came up with a recipe for Nutella cookies. What's not to like here? These books fit my definition of spiritual. how to apply virtues that almost all religions agree on to everyday life. I felt that my thinking was challenged and stretched, and I was a bit better after I read the books. And I laughed because they were lighthearted, a great bonus. The reason for bringing up the book about witches is that the stories were uplifting. I did not want to put them down. I hated when they ended. They dealt with difficult issues of today. They had lesbian witches, autistic witches, antisocial witches, grumpy old men, this particular one happened to be a wizard, grief, the gamut of life. And they dealt with them from a place of love and with a light hand. I never felt lectured to, and I often chuckled. I felt this was a group of people I really wanted to know and to learn from. Are these books great art? I don't think so. But they spoke to me, and I guess that's art of a sort. Are they spiritual? Not in a religious sense, but in a how to grapple with the moral dilemma way, they were spiritual. The stories addressed how to show love, caring, and respect in realistic ways in difficult situations. Well, they were realistic if you have magic. And they were entertainment, they were not lectures. Are they writing? That sounds like a silly question, but how many of us have read or tried to read books that were poorly written and the language was too hard to deal with or so distracting that we just gave up? In that vein, yes, they are writing. The mechanics of the writing never detracted from the reading. The author's a competent user of the English language. She creates word pictures that draw the reader in, creates laughter or tears or anger, and the writing never lets the reader stumble over the language. I would be pleased to create such books. Ursula Le Guin and Maya Angelou are out of my league, but they can make me think and see things and wonder at their words and ask myself questions and set goals. I hold them out as a writer as probably unattainable goals. For now, I'd love to write stories like Deborah Geary. Thank you for giving me the opportunity to think about these new things. I've enjoyed my time with you.